The dust-laden wind whipped across the plains as Josephine O'Malley stared down the barrel of her father's revolver, the cold metal pressing against the temple of the man who'd murdered her only brother. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from a rage so potent it threatened to consume her very soul. She'd tracked this outlaw across 3 territories, and now here she was in Aztec, New Mexico Territory, 1875, about to exact the vengeance she'd sworn on her brother's grave. "Go on then," the outlaw sneered through blood-stained teeth. "Pull the trigger, little lady, show me what you're made of." Josephine's finger tensed on the trigger, but before she could complete the deadly arc, a strong hand clamped down on her wrist, pushing the gun skyward. "That's not how justice works in this town," a deep voice drawled from behind her. Josephine whirled, yanking her arm free to confront the interfering stranger, a tall man with sun-weathered skin, intelligent hazel eyes, and a silver sheriff's badge pinned to his dust-covered vest. "Sheriff Drake Fairfield," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his worn Stetson. "And you, madam, were about to make the biggest mistake of your life." The day had begun like any other in Aztec, the small but growing settlement nestled in the northwestern corner of the New Mexico Territory. Sheriff Drake Fairfield had awakened before dawn, a habit formed during his years riding with the Texas Rangers. At 32, he'd seen enough bloodshed to last several lifetimes and had come to Aztec seeking something resembling peace. The town was a peculiar mix of hopeful settlers, hard-working ranchers, shopkeepers, and the usual assortment of drifters that populated every frontier settlement. Situated in the fertile valley of the Animas River, Aztec had promised fertile land, water, and a growing sense of community that Drake found himself unexpectedly drawn to after years of rootless wandering. He'd finished his morning rounds, checked in on old Mrs. Whitaker, who insisted someone had been prowling around her chicken coop, and was just settling in for a cup of coffee at Lily's Cafe when the commotion started. A woman the likes of which Aztec rarely saw had ridden into town on a magnificent black mare, her dress dusty but of fine quality, her posture straight as an arrow despite what must have been days of hard riding. She dismounted in front of the saloon with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. Drake had observed her with mild curiosity until she'd drawn a revolver from her saddlebag and walked with determined steps into the establishment. That's when his instincts flared. By the time he'd thrown some coins on the table and followed her inside, she had already located her target, Raymond "Red" Wilson, a known killer with a bounty on his head in 2 territories. Now, as Drake held the furious woman's arm, preventing her from committing murder in broad daylight, he could see the wild rage in her eyes, a look he recognized all too well. It was the gaze of someone consumed by vengeance, someone who'd ride straight into hell without a backward glance. "You don't understand," she hissed, attempting to wrench free of his grip. "This man killed my brother. I've hunted him for 6 months. Then you'll want to see him hang properly," Drake replied evenly, signaling to his deputy who had entered behind him. "Not shoot him like a dog in a saloon." Red Wilson, his face bloodied where the woman had apparently struck him with her pistol before Drake's arrival, spat on the sawdust-covered floor. "The O'Malley bitch won't rest until I'm dead, just like her foolish brother." In a flash, the woman in O'Malley apparently lunged toward Wilson again, but Drake's reflexes were quicker. He caught her around the waist, lifting her bodily away from the outlaw. "Deputy Carson, get Wilson locked up," Drake ordered, "and send someone for Doc Miller. I want this man alive for his trial." Josephine struggled against the sheriff's iron grip as the deputy dragged a laughing Wilson away. "Let me go," she demanded, her voice breaking with emotion. "You have no right." "Actually, I have every right," Drake replied calmly, maintaining his hold but careful not to hurt her. "This is my town, and in my town we follow the law." When they were alone in the now silent saloon, Drake finally released her, though he kept himself positioned between her and the door. The woman straightened her clothing with as much dignity as she could muster, her emerald eyes still flashing with fury. "I'm Sheriff Fairfield," he said again, this time extending his hand. "And you would be—" She ignored his outstretched hand. "Josephine O'Malley. That man murdered my brother Patrick in cold blood 6 months ago in Denver. I've been tracking him ever since." Drake studied her more carefully. Behind the rage and trail dust, he could see the fine lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes and mouth. Her skin, though tanned from the sun, was fair, and her auburn hair was escaping from what had once been an elegant twist at the nape of her neck. "Miss O'Malley, Wilson will face justice. I've been waiting for him to show his face in my jurisdiction for months. He's wanted for 3 murders that I know of." "4, she corrected sharply. "My brother makes 4, Drake nodded solemnly. "4 then, but killing him yourself won't bring your brother back. It'll just turn you into something you weren't meant to be." "You don't know me," she said bitterly. "You don't know what I was meant to be." "No," Drake conceded, "but I know what killing does to a person's soul, even when it's justified." Something in his tone must have reached her, because some of the rigid fury seemed to drain from her posture. She sank onto the nearest chair, suddenly looking every mile of her long journey. "He has to pay for what he did," she said, her voice softer but no less determined. "And he will," Drake promised. "But through the courts. We have a circuit judge due in town next week. Wilson will stand trial, and with your testimony, he'll hang legally." Josephine looked up at him, skepticism evident in her expression. "And if he escapes before then? Or if your fine legal system decides he deserves mercy?" Drake pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down, meeting her gaze directly. "He won't escape. I give you my word on that. As for mercy—" He shook his head. "Red Wilson has exhausted any claim to mercy in this life." The saloon doors swung open and a short, balding man with spectacles hurried in, medical bag in hand. "Sheriff, Deputy Carson said you needed me." "Not for us, Doc, for the prisoner. Miss O'Malley here gave him a proper greeting before I intervened." There was a hint of reluctant admiration in Drake's voice. The doctor nodded and hurried toward the jail, leaving Drake alone again with Josephine. "You'll need accommodations while you're in town," Drake said. "Mrs. Winters runs a respectable boarding house 2 streets over." "I can escort you there if you'd like." Josephine hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," she said, the words clearly unfamiliar on her tongue in her current state. I haven't slept in a proper bed for weeks." Drake stood and offered his hand again, this time to help her up. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted it, and he was struck by the contrast. Her hand was small but calloused, a lady's hand that had known hard work and harder times. "Your horse will need tending as well," he observed as they stepped out onto the boardwalk. "The livery stable is—" "I know where it is," she interrupted. "I made arrangements for midnight before I found Wilson." Drake nodded, impressed despite himself. Even in her quest for vengeance, she'd thought to care for her mount first. "A good rider knows their priorities," he commented. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "My father taught me that much, at least." They walked in silence to the livery where Josephine checked on her mare, a magnificent beast that Drake estimated was worth more than 6 months of his salary. The horse greeted her with a soft nickering, and the tender way Josephine stroked its muzzle revealed yet another facet of this complex woman. "She's beautiful," Drake commented. "She's all I have left," Josephine replied simply. From there they walked to the boarding house where Mrs. Winters, a widow with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, looked Josephine up and down with open curiosity. "She'll need your best room, Mrs. Winters," Drake said. "Miss O'Malley is in town on important business." The older woman raised an eyebrow. "Is she now?" "Well, I don't allow any shenanigans in my establishment, Sheriff, as you well know." "I assure you, Mrs. Winters, the only shenanigans I'm interested in involve seeing a murderer brought to justice," Josephine said with surprising poise. Mrs. Winters seemed satisfied with this answer. "Rooms at the top of the stairs, first door on the right. Baths extra, but from the look of you, it'd be worth the investment." Drake suppressed a smile at the older woman's bluntness. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Winter's capable hands, Miss O'Malley. If you need anything, my office is just down from the bank." Josephine nodded. "Thank you for your assistance, Sheriff, though I'm not certain I'm grateful for it yet." "You will be," he said with quiet confidence. "Justice is sweeter when it doesn't cost you your soul to get it." With that, he tipped his hat and departed, aware of her eyes following him as he walked down the street toward the jailhouse. Red Wilson would need watching, and Drake didn't trust anyone else to ensure the man faced proper justice, not with Josephine O'Malley's vengeance hanging in the balance. The bath Mrs. Winters provided was lukewarm at best, but to Josephine, it felt like heaven after months of creek baths and hasty washes in boarding house basins across 3 territories. She scrubbed away the trail dust and with it, some of the manic energy that had sustained her since Patrick's murder. As she soaked, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She had found Wilson, just as she'd sworn to do over Patrick's grave, but the satisfaction she'd anticipated was denied her by Sheriff Fairfield's interference. Now she was stuck in this dusty town for at least a week, waiting for a circuit judge who might or might not deliver the justice Patrick deserved. After her bath, she dressed in the one clean outfit she had left, a simple blue calico dress that had seen better days but was at least free of dust and travel stains. Her finer clothes, the ones she'd worn in her previous life in Denver society, were long gone sold to fund her pursuit of Wilson. The room Mrs. Winters had provided was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the main street. Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the exhaustion that had been held at bay by her single-minded purpose. She hadn't allowed herself to truly rest since the day she'd found Patrick, shot in the back in his own office. Her father had been gone for 3 years by then, and with Patrick's death, the O'Malley shipping business built from nothing by their immigrant father had fallen to her. But instead of stepping into her brother's shoes, she'd sold everything except the essentials needed to hunt down his killer. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss O'Malley," Mrs. Winters called. "Supper's ready if you've a mind to join the other boarders." Josephine hesitated. The thought of making polite conversation with strangers was almost unbearable, but her stomach growled insistently, reminding her that her last meal had been a stale biscuit at dawn. "I'll be right down," she called back. The boarding house dining room held a long table where 6 other guests were already seated: a traveling salesman, an elderly couple, a young schoolteacher, and 2 men who appeared to be ranch hands. Mrs. Winters made the introductions, though Josephine immediately forgot most of the names, her mind still consumed with thoughts of Wilson and whether he would truly face justice. The conversation flowed around her as she picked at the simple but hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread. She answered direct questions with polite brevity, revealing nothing of her purpose in town. However, when Mrs. Winters mentioned that the sheriff had brought her in, the table's interest visibly heightened. "Sheriff Fairfield is a good man," the elderly woman, Mrs. Peterson, said with a decisive nod. "Saved this town from going to ruin when those cattle rustlers moved in last year. Single too," Mrs. Winters added with a meaningful look at Josephine. "A fine catch for any sensible woman." Josephine nearly choked on her water. "I assure you, Mrs. Winters, I have no interest in catching anyone, sensible or otherwise. My business in Aztec is strictly temporary." "Shame," the woman replied, unperturbed. "Town could use more decent womenfolk with backbone, too many flighty girls and not enough women of substance, if you ask me." Josephine was saved from responding by another knock at the front door. Mrs. Winters excused herself to answer it, returning moments later with Sheriff Fairfield himself. "Begging your pardon for the interruption," he said, hat in hand, his gaze finding Josephine immediately. "Miss O'Malley, might I have a word?" A chill ran through her. Had Wilson escaped already? She rose from the table, nodding to the other diners. "Please excuse me." Drake led her to the small parlor off the main hallway, closing the door partway for privacy but leaving it open enough to maintain propriety. "Is he gone?" Josephine demanded without preamble. "No," Drake assured her. "Wilson is secure in my jail, that's not why I'm here," she frowned. "Then what brings you at the dinner hour, Sheriff?" Drake shifted his weight, suddenly seeming less sure of himself than he had been in the saloon. "I've been thinking about your situation. A week is a long time to wait in a strange town with nothing but thoughts of vengeance for company." "I'm quite capable of occupying myself, thank you," she replied stiffly. "I don't doubt it," he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But I thought you might want something more productive to do with your time." Josephine raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "My office is a mess of wanted posters and reports that need organizing. My deputy tries, but Carson's a better shot than he is a clerk. I could use someone with a sharp mind to help make sense of it all." He paused. "It would also give you a chance to build the case against Wilson properly, ensure nothing is missed that could let him wriggle free." Josephine studied him, trying to discern his true motive. "You're offering me a job out of charity," Drake shook his head, "not charity, necessity. And I'll pay fair wages. You look like someone who might need them, given how long you've been on the trail." He wasn't wrong. Josephine's funds were nearly depleted after months of travel and bribes for information about Wilson's whereabouts. "Besides," he added more quietly, "I'd rather keep you where I can see you, at least until I'm certain you won't try to take justice into your own hands again." There it was the real reason. Josephine almost refused on principle, but practicality won out. She did need the money, and being close to Wilson's cell would allow her to ensure he didn't somehow escape before the judge arrived. "Very well," she said at last. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, he replied, seeming relieved. "And Miss O'Malley?" "Yes." "Leave your revolver in your room." She gave him a tight smile. "As you wish, Sheriff, but I should warn you I'm equally skilled with a letter opener." To her surprise, Drake laughed a warm, genuine sound that momentarily transformed his serious face. "I don't doubt that for a second, Miss O'Malley." As he turned to leave, he paused. "One more thing, Wilson's asking to speak with you." Josephine's heart lurched. "Why?" he wouldn't say. "I told him it was up to you." She hesitated, torn between the desire to confront her brother's killer and the fear of what he might say. "You don't have to decide now," Drake said gently. "Think on it overnight." After he left, Josephine returned to the dining table, but her appetite had vanished. She excused herself early and retreated to her room, where she spent a restless night wrestling with the question of whether to face Wilson and what she would say if she did. Morning came too soon, the first light of dawn filtering through the thin curtains of her rented room. Josephine had slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by Patrick's face and the mocking laughter of Red Wilson. She rose, splashed cold water on her face, and dressed in the same blue calico dress, wishing for her more practical riding clothes that were currently being laundered by Mrs. Winters. After a quick breakfast of coffee and toast, she made her way to the sheriff's office, conscious of the curious glances from townspeople beginning their daily routines. Clearly, word had spread about the woman who'd nearly shot a man in the saloon. The sheriff's office was a simple wooden building with barred windows and a sign declaring Aztec Sheriff in faded paint. Josephine hesitated at the door, suddenly uncertain. Inside was not only Sheriff Fairfield, but also the man who had destroyed her life with a single bullet. Was she really prepared to spend her days working mere feet from Wilson's cell? Before she could decide, the door opened, and Drake stood before her, looking freshly shaved and surprisingly well-groomed for a frontier lawman. "Good morning, Miss O'Malley," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd changed your mind." "I considered it," she admitted, stepping past him into the office. It was indeed a mess. Wanted posters haphazardly tacked to the walls, stacks of papers on every surface, and a collection of dusty law books teetering precariously on a shelf. "Carson tries," Drake said, following her gaze, "but organization isn't his strong suit." "Evidently," Josephine murmured, already mentally cataloging the chaos and how to tame it. Wilson's in the back cell, Drake said, lowering his voice. He can't see out here, but you can hear him if he calls out. If he bothers you, let me know. Josephine nodded, removing her shawl and hanging it on a peg by the door. Where should I begin? Drake gestured to a desk in the corner. That can be yours. I'd start with the wanted posters, sort them by territory, then by severity of crime. The most recent ones should go on the board. He paused. Have you decided if you want to speak with Wilson? Josephine took a deep breath. Yes, I'll speak with him, but not yet. I need time. Drake studied her face, then nodded. Whenever you're ready, I'll be present for any conversation. I assumed as much, she replied, already moving toward the desk he'd indicated. The work was tedious but engaging enough to keep her mind occupied. She sorted through years' worth of wanted notices, creating neat piles organized by territory and date. Many of the men pictured were likely dead or long gone from the area, but she dutifully cataloged each one. Around mid-morning, the deputy, a young man with sandy hair and an earnest expression, arrived to take over watching the prisoner while Drake made his rounds. Miss O'Malley, this is Deputy Carson, Drake introduced. Carson, Miss Josephine O'Malley will be helping us get this place in order. The deputy tipped his hat. Madam, that's a mighty ambitious undertaking. Someone has to do it, she replied with a small smile. After Drake left, Carson busied himself cleaning his revolver while keeping one eye on the door to the cells. Is it true you tracked Wilson across 3 territories? He asked after a while. Josephine glanced up from her work. Yes, that's something, he said, clearly impressed. Most men I know wouldn't have the determination. My brother deserved justice, she said simply. No one else was going to ensure he got it. Carson nodded thoughtfully. The sheriff, he understands that better than most. Lost his wife and child to raiders back in Texas. That's why he came out here. Too many memories. Josephine paused in her sorting, surprised by this revelation. Drake Fairfield had never mentioned a family, but it explained something about the shadows she'd glimpsed behind his steady gaze. How did he end up in Aztec? She asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Just passing through way I heard it, Carson replied, warming to his role as informant. Town was in a bad way. Previous sheriff was in the pocket of some cattle rustlers. Drake stepped in when they shot a local rancher, cleaned the place up, and the town council begged him to stay on. Josephine absorbed this information, adding it to her mental portrait of the sheriff, a widower. A man familiar with loss and the thirst for justice it created. Perhaps that's why he'd recognized the danger in her so quickly. He's a good man, Carson continued. Fair, tough when he needs to be, but not mean about it. He stopped me from killing Wilson, Josephine said quietly. I'm still not sure if that was a kindness or a cruelty. Carson looked uncomfortable with this philosophical turn. Well, madam, I reckon the sheriff knows what he's about. Wilson will hang proper after the trial, you'll see. From the cells came a sudden laugh, harsh and mocking. Is that the O'Malley woman I hear? Come to ensure my proper hanging? Josephine stiffened, her hands clenching around the wanted poster she held. Shut your mouth, Wilson, Carson called back, rising from his chair. Or I'll give you something else to worry about. Tell her about her brother, Wilson called, his voice sly. Tell her how he begged before I shot him. Tell her. Carson moved swiftly to the cell door, his face flushed with anger. That's enough. Josephine stood frozen, the papers forgotten. Patrick, begging, no, it wasn't possible. Her brother had been the bravest man she knew. He's lying, she whispered, more to herself than to Carson. Patrick would never beg. The deputy returned, his expression sympathetic. Don't listen to him, Miss O'Malley. Men like that, they enjoy causing pain any way they can. Josephine nodded mechanically, but Wilson's words had lodged in her mind like splinters. Had Patrick's last moments been filled with fear and pleading? The thought was unbearable. When Drake returned an hour later, he found her still at the desk, working with mechanical precision, her face a careful mask of composure. Everything all right? He asked, looking between her and Carson. Wilson was running his mouth, Carson reported quietly. Trying to get under Miss O'Malley's skin. Drake's jaw tightened. I see. He moved toward the cells, but Josephine's voice stopped him. Don't, she said. It's what he wants. A reaction. Drake studied her for a long moment, then nodded. You're right. But I won't have him tormenting you while you work. I can handle it, she said, lifting her chin. He's taken enough from me already. I won't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Something like respect flickered in Drake's eyes. Very well. But the offer stands. You can speak with him when you're ready, on your terms. The rest of the day passed in relative quiet. Wilson, perhaps sensing that his taunts had fallen on deliberately deaf ears, remained silent. By evening, Josephine had made significant progress on the wanted posters and had begun organizing the chaotic stack of correspondence from other law enforcement offices across the territory. You've done more in one day than Carson's managed in a month, Drake commented as she prepared to leave. I'm impressed. I grew up helping my father with his shipping business, she explained. Organization was essential. Your father was a businessman in Denver, she nodded. He came from Ireland with nothing, built O'Malley Shipping from the ground up. When he died, Patrick took over. And when Patrick, she swallowed. Well, it should have been mine, but I had other priorities. Drake walked her to the door. What will you do, after Wilson's trial, I mean? Josephine had asked herself the same question many times during her months of pursuit. I don't know, she admitted. Everything I've done for the past 6 months has been focused on finding Wilson. I haven't thought beyond that. You could rebuild your father's business, he suggested. Perhaps, she said, though the thought held little appeal. The business had been Patrick's passion more than hers. Or perhaps I'll just keep moving. There's a lot of country I haven't seen. Drake nodded, understanding in his eyes. Well, you've got time to decide. Judge won't be here until next Wednesday at the earliest. Tomorrow, then, she asked, reaching for her shawl. Tomorrow, he confirmed. And Miss O'Malley, try to get some rest. Wilson isn't worth losing sleep over. Easier said than done, she thought as she walked back to the boarding house. Wilson's taunting words about Patrick's final moments echoed in her mind, poisoning her memories of her brave, laughing brother. That night, her dreams were worse. Patrick on his knees, pleading for his life while Wilson laughed. She awoke with tears on her cheeks and a renewed determination to face Wilson, to learn the truth of what happened that day in Denver. After a quick breakfast, she walked briskly to the sheriff's office, her mind made up. She found Drake at his desk, a cup of coffee in hand, reviewing some papers. I want to speak with him, she said without preamble. Now, before I lose my nerve. Drake set down his coffee and stood. Are you certain? Yes. I need to hear the truth from his own lips, even if it's ugly, Drake nodded. I'll be right there with you. If at any point you want to stop, I won't, she said firmly. He led her to the cells in the back of the building. There were 3 in total, but only one was occupied. Wilson sat on a narrow cot, his back against the wall, a mocking smile spreading across his face as they approached. Well, well, the grieving sister finally comes to call, he drawled. I was beginning to think you were avoiding me. I was, Josephine said honestly, standing tall despite the churning in her stomach. But I need to know what happened that day. Wilson's smile widened. What's it worth to you? Drake stepped forward. You're not bargaining here, Wilson. You tell Miss O'Malley what she wants to know, or I'll make sure the judge hears about how uncooperative you've been. Wilson considered this, then shrugged. Fine. What do you want to know, Miss O'Malley? How your brother died, how the light went out of his eyes when I put a bullet in him. Josephine flinched but held her ground. I want to know why. Patrick never hurt anyone. He was a businessman, not a gunslinger. Wilson's expression changed, a flash of genuine anger crossing his features. A businessman? Is that what you think? Your precious brother was a thief and a liar. You're the liar, Josephine shot back. Patrick was honest to a fault. Wilson laughed a harsh, ugly sound. He cheated me out of a silver mine claim in Colorado, used his fancy lawyers to find a loophole in the deed. That mine was my future, and he stole it right out from under me. Josephine shook her head in disbelief. That's absurd. Patrick never mentioned any silver mine. No, I don't suppose he would have, Wilson sneered. Not to his innocent little sister, but he knew exactly what he was doing. Drake watched the exchange carefully. That still doesn't justify murder, Wilson. Maybe not in your law books, Sheriff, but where I come from, a man defends what's his. Wilson's gaze returned to Josephine. I confronted him in his office, told him to make it right. He refused. Said the claim was legally his and there wasn't a thing I could do about it. So you shot him, just like that. Josephine's voice trembled with disbelief. Not just like that, Wilson said, his voice dropping. I gave him a chance, told him to sign the deed back over to me. When he wouldn't, I drew on him. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. That's when he started begging, please don't kill me, I have a sister, she needs me. Pathetic. Josephine felt as though she'd been struck. The words rang with a terrible plausibility. Patrick had always been protective of her, putting her welfare above his own. You're lying, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Why would I lie now? Wilson asked. I'm already caught, already going to hang. Truth is, your brother died thinking of you. Small comfort, I suppose. Josephine turned away, unable to bear the sight of Wilson's satisfied expression any longer. Drake placed a supportive hand on her shoulder, guiding her back to the main office. Once they were out of Wilson's earshot, Drake spoke softly. People say all sorts of things to justify their crimes. It doesn't make them true. But what if it is true? Josephine whispered. What if Patrick did steal that claim? What if he wasn't the man I thought he was? Drake shook his head. It doesn't matter. Nothing justifies what Wilson did. Nothing. I need some air, she said abruptly, moving toward the door. Josephine, Drake called, using her first name for the first time. Don't let him win by making you doubt your brother. She paused at the door. Thank you for arranging the meeting, Sheriff. I'll be back to work tomorrow. Without waiting for his response, she stepped out into the bright morning sunlight, her mind reeling with Wilson's revelations. She walked aimlessly, eventually finding herself at the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open country. Had Patrick really stolen Wilson's claim? It seemed so unlike the brother she knew, honest, forthright, always insisting on doing the right thing. But then, she hadn't been involved in the business details. Perhaps there was more to the story than she knew. The uncertainty gnawed at her. For 6 months, her quest had been fueled by righteous anger, by the certainty that Patrick had been an innocent victim. Now that foundation felt unstable beneath her feet. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until Drake was beside her. I thought I might find you here, he said, his voice gentle. Did you follow me? She asked without looking at him. I wanted to make sure you were all right, he admitted. Wilson has a gift for finding weaknesses and exploiting them. Josephine sighed, finally turning to face him. The problem is, I don't know what's true anymore. I never questioned why someone would want to kill Patrick. I just assumed Wilson was a monster who killed without reason. He is a monster, Drake said firmly. Regardless of any dispute over a mining claim, murder is never justified. I know that, she said. But it changes things, doesn't it, to think that Patrick might have. That he might not have been completely innocent. Drake was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. My experience is that few people are completely innocent or completely guilty. We're all just doing our best with the choices in front of us. Even Wilson, she challenged. No, Drake said, his expression hardening. There are lines decent people don't cross, no matter the provocation. Wilson crossed that line when he pulled the trigger. Josephine nodded, drawing some comfort from his certainty. I've spent 6 months defining myself by my hatred for Wilson, by my need to see him punished. If that's not the whole story, I don't know who I am anymore. Drake reached out, hesitating before gently taking her hand. You're Josephine O'Malley. You're loyal, determined, and braver than most men I know. Wilson didn't define you 6 months ago, and he doesn't define you now. His touch was warm and steady, like an anchor in a storm. For the first time since Patrick's death, Josephine felt the hard shell around her heart begin to crack. Thank you, she said softly, surprised by the tears that threatened to fall. Drake released her hand, a hint of color rising in his tanned cheeks. "I should get back to the office. Carson's watching Wilson, but I don't like being away too long." "I'll walk with you," she offered. "I think I've had enough solitude for one day." As they walked back to town side by side, Josephine felt something shift between them, a tentative understanding, perhaps, or the first fragile threads of friendship forming. Either way, she was grateful for his steady presence as she navigated these turbulent emotional waters. Over the next few days, Josephine fell into a routine. She worked at the sheriff's office during the day, transforming the chaotic space into a model of efficiency. In the evenings, she often found herself joining Drake for dinner at Lily's cafe, where they talked about everything from literature to horse breeding. She learned that he had been married young to his childhood sweetheart, Sarah, and that they'd had a son named James who would have been 8 years old had he lived. Both had been killed during a raid on their small Texas homestead, while Drake was away on ranger business, a loss that had nearly destroyed him. In turn, she told him about growing up in Denver, about her father's journey from penniless immigrant to successful businessman, and about Patrick's unfailing kindness to her after their mother died when Josephine was just 12. "He sounds like he was a good brother," Drake commented one evening over coffee. "He was," Josephine agreed, her voice soft with memory. "Which is why Wilson's claims trouble me so much. I can't reconcile the Patrick I knew with someone who would steal another man's livelihood." Drake studied her thoughtfully. "Have you considered that both things might be true? That Patrick could have been a loving brother to you and still made mistakes in business?" Josephine sighed. "I suppose, but it's hard to accept that I might never know the full truth." "Sometimes we have to make peace with that," Drake said, "with not knowing everything." Their conversations never touched directly on the future, on what would happen after Wilson's trial or whether Josephine would stay in Aztec. It was as if both of them were afraid to acknowledge the growing connection between them, knowing it might not survive the hard realities ahead. As the day of the judge's arrival approached, tension in the sheriff's office increased. Drake was more vigilant than ever, taking no chances with Wilson's security. 2 additional deputies were sworn in temporarily to help guard the prisoner, and Drake himself often slept on a cot in the office rather than returning to his small house on the edge of town. "You're worried he'll try to escape," Josephine observed on the evening before the judge was due. Drake nodded grimly. "Men facing the noose get desperate. I've seen it before." "Let me help," she offered. "I could take a shift watching him." Drake shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. Wilson's fixated on you and I won't put you in danger." "I can handle a gun," she reminded him. "I don't doubt it," he said with a small smile. "But my answer is still no. Go get some rest, Josephine. Tomorrow will be a long day." She wanted to argue but saw the determination in his eyes. "Very well, but promise me you'll get some sleep too." "I promise," he said, though they both knew it was likely a lie. Josephine left reluctantly, the evening shadows lengthening as she walked back to Mrs. Winter's boarding house. The town was quieter than usual, as if holding its breath in anticipation of tomorrow's events. She had just turned onto the street where the boarding house stood when she heard footsteps behind her. Before she could turn, a rough hand clamped over her mouth and she felt the cold press of a gun barrel against her ribs. "Make a sound and you're dead," a voice hissed in her ear, a voice she didn't recognize. "Now walk nice and easy." Terror and fury warred within her as she was forced down a narrow alley between buildings. Was this one of Wilson's friends, come to silence her before she could testify? Or just a common thief who'd spotted a woman walking alone? Her question was answered as they emerged on the other side of the alley, where a man on horseback waited, his features obscured by the gathering darkness. "Got her," her captor announced. The mounted man leaned forward. "Miss O'Malley, I presume? Red said you were a pretty one." So they were Wilson's associates. Josephine's mind raced. How many were there? How had they known where to find her? And most importantly, what were they planning? "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Insurance," the mounted man replied. Red's too valuable to lose to a hangman's noose, understanding dawned. You're using me to bargain for Wilson's release. Smart as well as pretty, the man chuckled. Red was right about you. Sheriff Fairfield won't trade Wilson for me, she said, trying to sound confident despite her racing heart. The mounted man dismounted, stepping closer. In the dim light, she could see he was older, with a weathered face and cold eyes. Maybe not for your safe return, but for your life. I think he might. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but Josephine forced it down, searching desperately for a way out. The man holding her was strong, his arm like iron around her waist, but his grip on her mouth had loosened slightly as they talked. You're making a mistake, she said, stalling for time. Wilson killed my brother. The sheriff knows I want him to hang. That may be, the older man agreed, but Fairfield's got a soft spot for damsels in distress, and you, my dear, are about to be very distressed indeed. He nodded to the man holding her. Get her on your horse. We need to be well away before she's missed. As her captor loosened his grip to move her toward his waiting mount, Josephine saw her chance. She drove her elbow hard into his stomach, simultaneously stomping on his instep with all her strength. The man cursed, his grip faltering just enough for her to wrench free. She ran, not back toward the alley where she might be trapped, but toward the open street, screaming as loudly as she could. Help, Sheriff, help! Behind her, she heard the men cursing, then the thunder of hooves as they gave chase. She darted between buildings, hoping to lose them in the maze of Aztec's back streets. Someone help! She continued to shout, praying that someone would hear her. A door opened ahead, light spilling onto the darkened street. Mrs. Whittaker, the elderly woman Drake had checked on the day Josephine arrived, peered out cautiously. Miss O'Malley, is that you making all that racket, please? Josephine gasped, reaching the door. Let me in. There are men after me. The old woman's eyes widened, but she stepped aside quickly, allowing Josephine to dart past her into the house. Land's sakes, child, what's happening? Wilson's men, Josephine explained breathlessly as Mrs. Whittaker secured the door. They tried to kidnap me. Do you have a gun? My Herbert's old shotgun, the woman confirmed, moving with surprising quickness to retrieve it from above the fireplace. Haven't fired it in years, but it should still work. Josephine took the weapon, checking to make sure it was loaded. Is there a back way out? I need to get to the sheriff's office, Mrs. Whittaker nodded. Through the kitchen, but you can't go out there alone, child. Those men will kill us both if they find us here, Josephine finished grimly. I need to warn Drake Sheriff Fairfield. This must be part of a plan to free Wilson. A pounding at the front door made both women jump. Open up, old woman, a voice demanded. We know she's in there. Go, Mrs. Whittaker whispered, pushing Josephine toward the kitchen. I'll hold them off as long as I can. Come with me, Josephine pleaded. The old woman shook her head. My legs aren't what they used to be. I'd only slow you down. Now go. With a heavy heart, Josephine slipped through the kitchen and out the back door, the shotgun clutched tightly in her hands. The night air was cool against her flushed skin as she moved as quietly as possible through the yards and alleys toward the sheriff's office. She had just emerged onto the main street when she heard a shotgun blast in the distance from the direction of Mrs. Whittaker's house. Her heart clenched with fear for the brave old woman, but she forced herself to keep moving. The best way to help Mrs. Whittaker now was to reach Drake. The sheriff's office was lit up, a beacon in the darkness. Josephine ran the last few yards, bursting through the door to find Drake and Carson on their feet, already alerted by the distant gunshot. Josephine, Drake exclaimed, taking in her disheveled appearance and the shotgun in her hands. What happened? Wilson's men, she gasped. They tried to take me. They're planning to use me to force you to release him. Drake's face hardened into a mask of fury. Are you hurt? No, but Mrs. Whittaker. She swallowed. She helped me escape. I heard a shotgun just now. Carson, stay with Josephine and watch Wilson, Drake ordered, checking his revolver. Don't open this door for anyone but me. Be careful, Josephine said as he moved past her. There are at least two of them. Drake paused, his hand on the door. Lock this behind me, he instructed Carson. And Josephine. Good work getting here." Then he was gone, vanishing into the night like a avenging spirit. Carson secured the door as instructed, then turned to Josephine. "You should sit down, Miss O'Malley. You look like you're about to fall over." She realized he was right. Her legs were trembling with the aftermath of fear and exertion. She sank into a chair, still clutching Mrs. Whittaker's shotgun. "What's all the commotion?" Wilson called from his cell, his voice falsely innocent. "Someone having a party without me." Josephine exchanged a look with Carson, who moved to the cell door. "Your friends just tried to kidnap Miss O'Malley," he said bluntly. "Didn't work out too well for them." There was a pause, then Wilson laughed. "Well, can't blame a man for trying, though I told Hank to wait until after dark." "It is after dark," Carson pointed out. "Is it?" Wilson seemed genuinely surprised. "Lose track of time in here." "Well, no matter, there's always Plan B." Something in his tone made Josephine uneasy. "What's Plan B?" she asked, approaching the cells. Wilson smiled, a predatory baring of teeth. "Now that would be telling, wouldn't it, Miss O'Malley?" Carson frowned. "Don't listen to him, Miss O'Malley. He's just trying to get under your skin again." But Josephine wasn't so sure. The confidence in Wilson's voice suggested he knew something they didn't. "Deputy, when is the judge due to arrive?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning," Carson replied. "Stage from Santa Fe gets in around 10, weather permitting," Wilson chuckled. "Weather permitting, that's a good one." Josephine and Carson exchanged worried glances. "What do you mean?" she demanded. Wilson leaned back on his cot, examining his fingernails with exaggerated casualness. "Oh, nothing. Just that the mountain pass can be dangerous this time of year. Rockslides, washouts, all sorts of unfortunate accidents can happen." Carson's hand moved to his gun. "What have you done, Wilson?" "Me?" Wilson spread his hands in mock innocence. "I've been right here in this cozy cell. How could I have done anything?" Josephine felt cold dread settle in her stomach. "Your friends, they're not just here for me, are they? They're planning to stop the judge from arriving." Wilson's smile was all the confirmation she needed. "Carson," she said urgently, "we need to warn the judge. If Wilson's men are planning an ambush, the sheriff will handle it," Carson assured her, though he looked worried. "He'll check on Mrs. Whittaker and then send riders to warn the stage." "But what if he doesn't realize the danger?" Josephine pressed. "He thinks this is just about freeing Wilson, not stopping the judge." Before Carson could respond, they heard a commotion outside, shouts and the sound of running feet. The deputy moved to the window, peering cautiously out. "Fire," he reported grimly. "Looks like the livery stable is burning." Wilson laughed again. "Plan C. Always have a Plan C." Understanding dawned on Josephine. It's a diversion. They're creating chaos to either break Wilson out or to prevent anyone from riding to warn the judge. Carson looked torn, clearly wanting to help with the fire but unwilling to leave his prisoner unguarded. "Go," Josephine said, raising the shotgun. "I can watch Wilson." "No way," Carson shook his head. "The sheriff would have my hide if I left you alone with him." "Then what do we do?" "The whole town could burn while we stand here arguing." The door suddenly rattled as someone tried the handle. "Carson, it's Drake. Open up." The deputy moved quickly to unlock the door, revealing a soot-stained Drake, his expression grim. "Mrs. Whittaker?" Josephine asked anxiously. "Shaken but alive," Drake reported. "She winged one of them with your first shot. Brave old woman." Relief flooded through Josephine. "Thank God. But we've got bigger problems," Drake continued. "The livery's on fire and most of the horses have been let loose or stolen. It's chaos out there." "It's a diversion," Josephine explained quickly. "Wilson just implied his men are planning to ambush the judge's stage tomorrow." Drake's expression darkened as he glanced toward the cells. "Is that so?" Wilson shrugged. "Can a man hope for a little luck?" "Maybe the judge will decide Aztec isn't worth the trouble." "Carson, stay with Wilson," Drake ordered. "If he so much as blinks wrong, shoot him. Josephine, with me." He led her back outside, where the night sky was now glowing orange from the livery fire. Townspeople had formed a bucket brigade from the town well, but it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. "We need to send someone to warn the judge," Josephine said, raising her voice to be heard over the commotion. Drake nodded grimly. That's why I came for you. You're the best rider in town from what I've seen. If anyone can get through to the stage route in time, it's you. Josephine stared at him in surprise. You want me to go? I can't leave Wilson, not with his men in town, Drake explained. And I need Carson with me. You're the only one I trust who can ride fast enough to make a difference. Josephine squared her shoulders. I'll need a horse. Already thought of that, Drake said, gesturing to where a familiar black mare was tethered to a hitching post a short distance away. Had to chase her down myself after she bolted from the livery. Figured she'd only let you ride her anyway. Midnight nickered in recognition as Josephine approached, seemingly unperturbed by the nearby fire. The stage route follows the river south, Drake explained as Josephine checked her saddle. The judge will be camping tonight at Cottonwood Station, about 15 miles from here. If you ride hard, you can make it before dawn. Josephine nodded, mounting with practiced ease. What about Wilson's men? They could be watching the roads. Drake handed her his spare revolver. Stay off the main trail when you can, and Josephine. He hesitated, then reached up to touch her hand where it rested on the reins. Be careful. The concern in his eyes warmed her in a way she hadn't expected. I will, she promised. As she turned midnight toward the south road, Drake called after her. When this is over, when Wilson's been dealt with, I'd like you to consider staying in Aztec. The words caught her off guard, making her pause. Why, even in the firelight, she could see the flush rising on his cheeks. Because I think you belong here with, he cleared his throat. Well, just think about it. Before she could respond, a shout from the direction of the burning livery demanded his attention. Drake gave her one last look before running to help with the fire. Josephine urged Midnight forward, her mind whirling with the implications of Drake's words as they galloped out of town. The road ahead was dark, illuminated only by moonlight, but Midnight was sure-footed and fearless. As Drake had suggested, Josephine stayed off the main trail where possible, cutting across open country and using the stars for navigation. The night was clear but cold, and she was grateful for the warmth of her horse beneath her. About 5 miles out of town, as she rejoined the main trail to cross a small stream, she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Immediately, she guided Midnight into the shelter of some cottonwood trees, drawing Drake's revolver as she waited. 2 riders appeared, moving at a steady trot toward Aztec. In the moonlight, she recognized one as the older man who had confronted her in town. They were talking as they rode, their voices carrying in the still night air. Don't care what Hank says, we can't wait for Wilson. If the judge makes it to town, it's all over. So what's the plan? The second rider asked. We meet the others at the canyon. The stage has to slow down for the narrow passage. That's when we hit them. And the girl, forget her. Getting Wilson out is what matters now. They passed by without noticing her hidden in the trees, and Josephine waited until they were well out of earshot before continuing on her way. The conversation confirmed her fears the judge was indeed the target, and there were more men involved than the 2 she'd encountered in town. She pushed Midnight harder, racing against time and Wilson's conspirators. The miles flew by beneath the mare's powerful strides, and as the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, Josephine spotted the rough wooden structures of Cottonwood Station ahead. The stage was already being readied for departure, the driver checking the harnesses while a stout man in a black suit, presumably the judge, supervised the loading of his luggage. Judge Parker, Josephine called as she approached, reining Midnight to a stop in a swirl of dust. Judge Parker, I bring an urgent message from Sheriff Fairfield of Aztec. The stout man turned, his bushy eyebrows raised in surprise. I am Judge Parker. And who might you be, young woman, riding alone at this hour? Josephine O'Malley, sir. Sheriff Fairfield sent me to warn you. There's a plot to ambush your stage before you reach Aztec. The judge's expression hardened. A plot? By whom? Associates of Raymond Wilson, she explained quickly. He's due to stand trial before you for multiple murders, including my brother's. The judge nodded in understanding. Ah, yes. Wilson, nasty piece of work from what I've heard. He turned to the stage driver. It seems we have a complication, Mr. Grant. The driver, a weathered man with a magnificent mustache, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. Wouldn't be the first time someone's tried to stop justice, Your Honor. Question is, what do we do about it? I overheard two of them talking, Josephine said. They mentioned meeting others at the canyon, a place where the stage has to slow down. The driver nodded. Devil's Throat. Narrow passage about 10 miles from here. Only way through unless you want to add 20 miles to the journey. How many men would it take to effectively block that pass? The judge asked. 3 or 4 with rifles could make it mighty uncomfortable, Grant replied. And if they've got dynamite? He shrugged eloquently. The judge turned back to Josephine. It seems, Miss O'Malley, that we are in your debt. Without your warning, we would have ridden straight into their trap. We can still reach Aztec, she said. There must be another route. As Mr. Grant mentioned, the alternative adds considerable distance, the judge said. But perhaps more importantly, if we fail to arrive as expected, Sheriff Fairfield might assume the worst. Josephine hadn't considered that. If Drake thought the judge had been ambushed, he might do something desperate to protect the town, perhaps even risk a confrontation with Wilson's men that could get him killed. Then we need to get through, she said firmly. Or at least get word to the sheriff that you're safe but delayed. The judge stroked his beard thoughtfully. What would you suggest, Miss O'Malley? You seem to have a stake in this matter beyond mere civic duty. Wilson murdered my brother, she said simply. I've tracked him across 3 territories to see him brought to justice. I won't let him escape now. Judge Parker studied her with new interest. I see. Well, Miss O'Malley, it seems we share a common goal, though perhaps from different perspectives. He turned to the stage driver. Mr. Grant, is there any way to approach this Devil's Throat without being observed? A way to turn the tables on these would be ambushers, Grant considered the question. There's an old game trail that runs above the canyon. Not suitable for the stage, but a rider could use it to get the drop on anyone waiting below. The judge nodded decisively. Then here's what we'll do. Miss O'Malley will take that trail and observe the ambush point. If it's clear, she'll signal us to proceed. If not, she'll return here and we'll take the longer route. I'll go with her, offered a voice from the station doorway. A young man with a marshal's badge stepped forward. These men are planning to interfere with a federal judge. That makes it my jurisdiction. Marshal Jenkins, the judge acknowledged. A sensible precaution. Miss O'Malley, do you agree to this plan? Josephine nodded. The idea of confronting more of Wilson's men was frightening, but the alternative, Wilson escaping justice, was unthinkable. Good, the judge said. Mr. Grant, how long will it take for Miss O'Malley and Marshal Jenkins to reach this vantage point and return if necessary? 2 hours, give or take, the driver estimated. Then we shall wait 2 hours, the judge declared. If you haven't returned by then, Miss O'Malley, we'll assume the pass is compromised and take the alternate route. Marshal Jenkins quickly readied his horse, and within minutes, he and Josephine were riding out, following Grant's directions to the game trail. Not many women would ride all night to warn a judge they've never met, Jenkins commented as they rode. This Wilson must have done something terrible. He killed my brother, Josephine replied simply. Jenkins nodded, asking no further questions. They rode in companionable silence, the marshal clearly experienced in the woods as he led them unerringly to the narrow trail Grant had described. The path was indeed little more than a game trail, winding through scrub oak and pine as it climbed the ridge above the canyon known as Devil's Throat. They dismounted to lead their horses the final stretch, moving as quietly as possible until they reached a vantage point overlooking the narrow passage below. There, Jenkins whispered, pointing to a cluster of boulders where the canyon was at its narrowest. Perfect spot for an ambush. Josephine squinted, trying to discern any movement among the rocks. I don't see anyone. Nor do I, Jenkins agreed, sounding troubled. Perhaps they're running late, or, he trailed off, his hand moving to his revolver. Or what? Josephine prompted. Or they've changed their plans, he finished. Either way, we should get back to the judge. If the pass is clear, the stage can get through before anyone arrives to block it. As they turned to retrieve their horses, a voice called from behind a nearby pine. I wouldn't move if I were you, Marshal. Not unless you want the lady to get hurt. A man stepped into view, rifle aimed steadily at Jenkins. Josephine recognized him as one of the men she'd overheard on the trail, the one who'd asked about the girl. You're interfering with federal business, Jenkins said calmly, his hands raised slightly. That's a hanging offense. Only if I get caught, the man replied with a grin. Now both of you drop your weapons, slowly. Josephine carefully placed Drake's revolver on the ground while Jenkins did the same with his. She glanced around, wondering if there were more of Wilson's men nearby. As if reading her thoughts, the man said, Hank and the others are down in the canyon waiting for the stage. They'll be mighty surprised when I bring you two along as a bonus. What do you want with us? Josephine demanded. Insurance, he replied. Judge Parker's mighty fond of doing things by the book. He won't risk a marshal's life by trying anything heroic. A plan began to form in Josephine's mind. If she could distract this man, Jenkins might have a chance to get to his weapon, but she needed the right moment. You're Wilson's man, she said, taking a small step sideways as if shifting her weight. Did he tell you why I was tracking him? Did he tell you what he did to my brother? The man shrugged. Red's business is his own. I'm just helping out a friend. Some friend, Josephine scoffed, taking another small step. Did you know he's planning to run once he's free? Leave you all to face the law while he disappears with whatever money he's got stashed away. The man frowned. That's a lie. Is it? Josephine kept her voice steady, remembering what Drake had told her about handling dangerous situations. Keep talking, stay calm. Why do you think he was in Denver when he killed my brother? He was clearing out his bank accounts before anyone could connect him to the mine swindle. She was improvising, but Wilson's revelation about the silver mine provided a plausible foundation. And more importantly, it was working. The man's attention was increasingly focused on her, his rifle barrel shifting slightly away from Jenkins. You don't know what you're talking about, the man growled, but doubt had crept into his voice. Don't I? Josephine took another step, drawing his focus further. Ask yourself why a man like Wilson would keep men like you around if he didn't need something from you, and once he has what he needs. The man's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Jenkins made his move, diving for his discarded revolver. The man swung his rifle back toward the marshal, and in that split second of distraction, Josephine lunged for Drake's gun. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously. The man staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as he fell. Jenkins rose, his revolver smoking, but then grimaced and clutched his shoulder where a rapidly spreading stain marked his shirt. Marshal, Josephine hurried to his side. Are you badly hurt? Just a graze, he said through gritted teeth, though his pallor suggested otherwise. But there's no time to waste. If the others heard those shots, they'll be coming to investigate. You need a doctor, Josephine insisted, helping him to his feet. Jenkins shook his head. What I need is to complete this mission. We have to warn the judge. They managed to reach their horses, though Jenkins needed Josephine's help to mount. As they rode back toward Cottonwood Station, Josephine kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see Wilson's men in pursuit. Almost there, she encouraged Jenkins, whose face was now alarmingly pale. Just hold on. The station came into view, the stage still waiting as promised. Judge Parker hurried out to meet them as they approached. Marshal Jenkins, you're wounded. It's nothing, Your Honor, Jenkins said, though he swayed in the saddle. The pass is being watched, at least 3 men, possibly more. We encountered one of them, Josephine added. There was an altercation. The judge raised an eyebrow. I see. Well, it seems the longer route is our only option. Mr. Grant, how soon can we depart? Right away, Your Honor, the driver replied. But it'll be late afternoon before we reach Aztec. Then Sheriff Fairfield will need to be informed of our delay, the judge said, turning to Josephine. Miss O'Malley, would you be willing to ride ahead again? Your mare looks fresher than our horses, and you clearly know the country. Josephine glanced at Midnight, who did indeed seem relatively unaffected by the night's exertions. Of course, Your Honor, but what about Marshal Jenkins? I'll tend to him myself, the judge assured her. I've some experience with bullet wounds from my years on the bench. After a brief rest and a meal of cold biscuits and jerky, Josephine set out again, this time taking the main road back to Aztec. With the ambush party focused on the canyon, this route should be relatively safe, and speed was now more important than stealth. The sun was high overhead when she finally spotted the outskirts of Aztec. The town seemed quieter than when she'd left, the charred remains of the livery stable a stark reminder of the previous night's chaos. She rode directly to the sheriff's office, relief flooding through her at the sight of Drake standing on the boardwalk outside, deep in conversation with a tall man she didn't recognize. "Drake," she called, dismounting before Midnight had fully stopped. He turned, his expression transforming from concern to relief as he recognized her. Josephine, thank God. In 3 long strides he was beside her, his hands gripping her shoulders as if to reassure himself she was real. "Are you all right? When you didn't return by dawn, I feared the worst." "I'm fine," she assured him. "The judge is safe, but he's taking the long route around Devil's Throat. Wilson's men were waiting to ambush the stage there." Drake's face hardened. "I figured as much when we caught 2 of them trying to break Wilson out during the fire." "But you're sure the judge is safe?" "Yes, though Marshal Jenkins was wounded in a skirmish with one of Wilson's men." She quickly related the events at the canyon. The judge said they should arrive by late afternoon. Drake nodded, then surprised her by pulling her into a brief, fierce embrace. "You did good, Josephine, real good." When he released her, she felt oddly bereft, missing the solid warmth of him against her. The tall stranger cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. "Oh," Drake said, looking slightly flustered. "Josephine, this is Marshal Turner from Santa Fe." "Marshal, Miss Josephine O'Malley." The marshal tipped his hat. "Miss O'Malley, I understand you've had quite an adventure." "That's one way to put it," she replied with a tired smile. "Marshal Turner arrived an hour ago," Drake explained. "Seems Wilson is even more wanted than we realized. There's a federal warrant out for him now, something about counterfeiting operations in California." "The man's been busy," Josephine commented dryly. "Indeed he has," Turner agreed. "Which is why I'm here to ensure he makes it to trial. No more escape attempts." Drake turned back to Josephine. "You should get some rest. You've been riding all night." She shook her head. "Not until Wilson faces the judge. I've come too far to miss it now." Drake looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. "At least come inside and sit down. You can tell us everything that happened at Cottonwood Station." The rest of the day passed slowly. Josephine recounted her journey in detail, accepted Carson's stammered thanks for her bravery, and drank more coffee than was probably wise. Turner took up position outside Wilson's cell, his imposing presence apparently dampening the prisoner's earlier bravado. As the shadows lengthened, Drake grew increasingly restless, pacing the office and checking his pocket watch every few minutes. "They should be here by now," he muttered. "Even taking the long route." "The judge said late afternoon," Josephine reminded him. "There's still time." Drake didn't look convinced. "I'm going to ride out a ways, see if I can spot them." "I'll go with you," Josephine offered, rising from her chair. Drake shook his head. "You've done enough riding for one day. Stay here with Turner and Carson." Before she could argue, the sound of hoofbeats and carriage wheels announced the arrival of the stage. They all hurried outside, where a small crowd had already gathered to witness the event. The stage pulled to a stop in a cloud of dust, and Judge Parker descended, looking remarkably unruffled despite the lengthy journey. Marshal Jenkins followed, his arm in a makeshift sling but his color much improved. "Sheriff Fairfield," the judge greeted, extending his hand. "I understand we have you and Miss O'Malley to thank for our safe arrival." "Just doing our job, Your Honor," Drake replied, shaking the offered hand. "I'm glad to see you made it safely." No thanks to Wilson's associates, the judge said grimly. I understand you have the man himself securely locked up, Drake nodded. Along with 2 of his conspirators. The rest got away during the confusion, but Marshal Turner has men searching the territory for them. Excellent, Judge Parker said, rubbing his hands together. In that case, I suggest we proceed with the trial as soon as possible. Tomorrow morning, perhaps? So soon? Josephine asked, surprised. The judge glanced at her. My dear Miss O'Malley, when justice has already been delayed as long as it has in this case, any further postponement serves only the guilty. Besides, he added with a small smile, I find my docket is remarkably clear at the moment, and so it was decided. The trial of Raymond Wilson would begin the following morning at 10 o'clock in the town hall, the only building in Aztec large enough to accommodate the proceedings and the curious townsfolk who would undoubtedly want to attend. That evening, Josephine found herself unable to settle. The boarding house felt stifling, and after picking at Mrs. Winter's stew, she excused herself for a walk. Her feet carried her automatically toward the sheriff's office, but instead of going inside, she continued past, eventually finding herself at the small cemetery on the edge of town. She stood there in the gathering dusk, thinking of Patrick and wondering if he would approve of what she'd done, of the vengeance that had consumed her for 6 months, and of how it had led her here, to this place, and these people who were gradually becoming something more than strangers. Thought I might find you here, Drake's voice came from behind her. She turned to see him approaching, his figure silhouetted against the last light of day. Am I that predictable? No, he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Just human. We all look for meaning in death one way or another. They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Are you ready for tomorrow? Drake finally asked. I think so, she replied. 6 months ago, I wanted nothing more than to put a bullet in Wilson myself. Now, she shrugged. Now I just want it to be over, Drake nodded. That's natural. Vengeance is a fire that burns everything in its path, including the one who carries it. Is that what happened to you? She asked softly, after your wife and son. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Yes, he finally admitted. For a while, I tracked down the men responsible one by one. Did it help when you found them? No, he said simply. It didn't bring Sarah and James back. It didn't fill the emptiness, it just created more emptiness in the end. Josephine considered this. So what did help? Drake turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. Time, purpose, finding something to build instead of destroy. He gestured toward the town. This place needed someone to care about it, to protect it. And I needed somewhere to belong. And do you? She asked. Belong here? I'm starting to think so, he said, his voice softer now. Especially since you arrived. The admission hung in the air between them, charged with possibilities neither was quite ready to name. What you said before I left, Josephine began hesitantly. About considering staying in Aztec. I meant it, Drake said quickly. The town could use someone like you. Smart, determined, not afraid to speak your mind. Is it just the town that could use someone like me? She asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Drake stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. No, he admitted. Not just the town. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Josephine felt something shift between them, a door opening to a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. Drake, Sheriff, Carson's voice broke the moment as the deputy jogged toward them. Sheriff, there's trouble at the jail. Wilson's asking for a priest, says he wants to confess before the trial. Drake sighed, the spell broken. There's no priest in Aztec, nearest one's in Santa Fe. That's what I told him, Carson said. He's insisting, getting real worked up about it. It's a trick, Josephine said with certainty. Another escape attempt, Drake nodded grimly. Probably, but I'd better go see what he's up to. He turned to her. Will you be all right getting back to Mrs. Winters? Of course, she assured him. Go, we'll talk more tomorrow. As Drake hurried away with Carson, Josephine stood for a moment longer in the cemetery, thinking about everything that had led her to this point: the grief, the rage, the relentless pursuit. Tomorrow, Wilson would face justice, and after that, she would need to decide what came next. The trial of Raymond Wilson began promptly at 10 the following morning. The town hall was packed to capacity, with people standing along the walls and even peering through the windows from outside. Judge Parker, imposing in his black robes, presided from a makeshift bench at the front of the room. Wilson was brought in under heavy guard, Marshal Turner and Deputy Carson flanking him while Drake stood watch at the door. The prisoner looked surprisingly composed, almost smug, as he took his place at the defendant's table. Josephine sat in the front row, directly in Wilson's line of sight. She wanted him to see her, to know that she had prevailed despite his every attempt to evade justice. The proceedings began with the reading of the charges: the murder of Patrick O'Malley, 3 other killings across 2 territories, attempted prison break, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Wilson pleaded not guilty to all charges, his voice clear and defiant. The prosecution presented its case first, calling witnesses from as far away as Denver who testified to Wilson's crimes. Josephine herself took the stand, describing how she had found Patrick murdered in his office and the evidence that had led her to Wilson. "And did the defendant ever confess to you his motive for killing your brother?" the prosecutor asked. Josephine hesitated, remembering Wilson's claim about the silver mine. "He stated that my brother had allegedly taken a mining claim from him through legal means. He considered this a justification for murder. And was there any truth to this allegation?" "I don't know," Josephine admitted honestly. "My brother never mentioned any dispute over a mine, but even if such a dispute existed, it would not justify murder." Wilson's defense was minimal, consisting mainly of attempts to discredit the witnesses and suggest that he was being framed by business rivals. When it was his turn to testify, he repeated his claim about Patrick stealing his mine, but under cross-examination, he was unable to produce any evidence of ever having owned such a claim. By mid-afternoon, both sides had presented their cases, and Judge Parker instructed the jury 12 men hastily assembled from Aztec citizens to deliberate. To everyone's surprise, they returned after less than 30 minutes. "We find the defendant guilty on all charges," the foreman announced, his voice solemn. A murmur rippled through the crowded room. Josephine felt a strange numbness, as if she were watching the scene from a great distance. This was the moment she had worked toward for 6 months, yet it brought none of the satisfaction she had expected. Judge Parker cleared his throat, silencing the room. "Raymond Wilson, you have been found guilty of multiple murders, including the cowardly assassination of Patrick O'Malley. These crimes, combined with your subsequent attempts to obstruct justice and the utter lack of remorse you have displayed, leave me no choice but to impose the maximum penalty." He paused, his gaze stern as it rested on Wilson. "You are hereby sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. The sentence to be carried out at dawn tomorrow." More murmurs, louder this time. Wilson's smug expression finally faltered, the reality of his situation apparently sinking in at last. "This court is adjourned," Judge Parker declared, bringing his gavel down with a decisive crack. As the crowd began to disperse, Josephine remained seated, unable to move. It was over. Wilson would hang, Patrick would have justice, and she had no idea what came next. "Miss O'Malley," Judge Parker approached, his expression softer now that court was no longer in session. "I wanted to express my personal condolences for your loss. Your brother seems to have been a fine man." "Thank you, Your Honor," she replied automatically. "I also wanted to tell you," the judge continued, "that inquiries have been made regarding Wilson's claims about the mine. There is no record of him ever having owned or filed a claim on any silver mine in Colorado territory." Josephine looked up, startled. "None at all," the judge shook his head. "It appears to have been a fabrication, perhaps intended to cast doubt on your brother's character and thereby justify Wilson's actions, at least in his own mind." Relief washed over her. Patrick hadn't stolen anything. He had been exactly the honest, honorable man she'd always believed him to be. "Thank you for telling me," she said sincerely. It matters more than I can say." The judge patted her shoulder awkwardly. "Justice has been served, Miss O'Malley. I hope it brings you some measure of peace." As he moved away, Drake approached, having completed his duties escorting Wilson back to the jail. "You all right?" he asked, his concern evident. "Yes," she said, and was surprised to find it was true. "I think I am." They walked together out of the town hall into the bright afternoon sunlight. The townspeople were dispersing, returning to their daily routines now that the excitement of the trial was over. "The judge told me about the mine," Josephine said as they strolled slowly down the main street. "There was no claim. Wilson made it all up," Drake nodded. "I'm not surprised. Men like that, they can't accept that their misfortunes might be their own doing. They need someone else to blame." They reached the sheriff's office, but instead of going inside, Drake guided her to a bench outside. "So," he said, settling beside her, "what happens now?" Josephine sighed. "That's the question, isn't it? For so long, finding Wilson was all I could think about, now that it's done." She trailed off, uncertain how to express the strange emptiness she felt. "You could go back to Denver," Drake suggested, though she noticed he didn't meet her eyes as he said it. "Rebuild your father's business." "I could," she agreed, "but I'm not sure that's what I want anymore." Drake's gaze returned to her face, hope kindling in his eyes. "What do you want, Josephine?" It was a question she'd been avoiding, but sitting here with him in the warm sunshine, the answer suddenly seemed clear. "I want to build something," she said softly, echoing his words from the cemetery. "Not destroy, I want purpose, connection." She hesitated, then added, "belonging." Drake reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they entwined with hers. "You could belong here," he said, his voice low and earnest. "With us. With me." Drake, she began, but was interrupted by the office door swinging open as Marshal Turner emerged. "Sheriff," he said, nodding to Drake, "Miss O'Malley. I wanted to let you know that we'll be doubling the guard on Wilson tonight. No chances of any last-minute rescue attempts." "Good thinking," Drake agreed, reluctantly releasing Josephine's hand. "I'll take the midnight shift myself." When Turner had gone, an awkward silence fell between them. The moment had passed, the spell broken. "I should go," Josephine said, rising from the bench. "Mrs. Winters is holding a special dinner tonight to celebrate Wilson's conviction. Apparently, the whole town's been invited." Drake stood as well. "Will you save a dance for me? I hear they're setting up for some music after dinner." Josephine smiled, warmth spreading through her at the thought. "I'd like that, Mrs. Winters' dinner was indeed a town-wide celebration, with tables set up in the street outside the boarding house and enough food to feed twice the population of Aztec. Lanterns hung from ropes strung between buildings, casting a warm glow over the gathering as the sun set. Josephine found herself welcomed into conversations, congratulated on Wilson's conviction, and treated not as an outsider but as someone who had earned a place in the community. It was a strange, unexpected feeling, this sense of acceptance among people who, just days ago, had been strangers. As promised, there was music after dinner. A fiddler, a man with a guitar, and another with a harmonica forming an impromptu band at one end of the street. Tables were pushed aside to create a dancing area, and couples soon filled the space. Josephine watched from the sidelines, sipping a cup of punch and enjoying the sight of the townspeople celebrating. Mrs. Whittaker, recovered from her ordeal, was regaling a group of wide-eyed children with a somewhat embellished account of how she had single-handedly fought off Wilson's men. "May I have this dance?" Drake's voice came from beside her. She turned to find him standing there, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt, his badge polished to a shine. He looked nervous, almost boyish, as he waited for her response. "You clean up nicely, Sheriff," she teased, setting down her punch. "A special occasion calls for special efforts," he replied with a smile, offering his arm. She took it, allowing him to lead her to the dancing area just as the musicians began a waltz. Drake's hand settled at her waist, warm and steady, as they began to move in time with the music. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," he said after a few moments. "About wanting to build something, to belong somewhere." Josephine looked up at him, admiring the way the lantern light caught in his eyes. And I was wondering if maybe we could build something together," he said, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "Here in Aztec, the town's growing. It could use someone with your business sense, your determination." "Is that all the town could use?" she asked, echoing their conversation from the night before. Drake's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "No," he admitted. "I could use someone too. Someone to remind me that there's more to life than duty. Someone to share it with." The music swirled around them, but Josephine barely heard it, her focus entirely on the man before her and the future he was offering. "Drake, I've spent 6 months consumed by vengeance," she said softly. "I don't know if I'm ready to be what you need." "I'm not asking you to be anything other than yourself," he replied. "Just give Aztec a chance. Give us a chance." Before she could respond, a commotion at the edge of the gathering caught their attention. Deputy Carson was pushing his way through the crowd, his expression urgent. "Sheriff," he called as he reached them. "Sheriff, there's trouble at the jail." Wilson's men. Drake was already moving, his hand going to his revolver. "Stay here," he ordered Josephine. "Carson with me." But Josephine had no intention of being left behind. This was her fight too had been from the beginning. She followed at a distance as Drake and Carson raced toward the jail, other men from the celebration falling in behind them. The scene at the jail was chaotic. The door stood open, lantern light spilling onto the boardwalk where Marshal Turner lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him. Inside, the sounds of struggle could be heard. Drake and Carson charged in, guns drawn. Josephine hung back, aware that she was unarmed and would likely be more hindrance than help in a gunfight. But as she waited, heart pounding, a figure slipped out the back door of the jail and into the alley beyond. Even in the dim light, she recognized Wilson's stocky silhouette. Without thinking, she gave chase, following him into the darkness between buildings. "Wilson," she shouted. "Stop right there," he whirled, a revolver in his hand. Marshal Turner's, she realized. Well, Miss O'Malley, come to see me off." "You're not going anywhere except back to that cell," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Wilson laughed. "And who's going to make me?" "You," he gestured with the gun. "Step aside, lady, I've got no quarrel with you anymore." "You murdered my brother," she reminded him, not moving an inch. "And I'll be punished for it, one way or another," he replied. "If not by your law, then by whatever comes after. But I'm not hanging tomorrow, and you're not stopping me tonight." He raised the gun, aiming it squarely at her chest. "Now move, or I'll add you to my tally. Doesn't much matter at this point." Josephine stood her ground, fear coursing through her but determination stronger. "You'll have to shoot me then, because I'm not letting you walk away from what you did to Patrick." Wilson's finger tightened on the trigger. "Your choice, lady." A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Wilson's gun. The outlaw staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as he fell forward onto the dirt of the alley. Behind him stood Drake, his revolver still raised. "Josephine," he breathed, rushing forward. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her legs suddenly felt too weak to support her. "Is he?" Drake knelt beside Wilson's motionless form, checking for a pulse. "Dead," he confirmed grimly. "Shot him right through the heart." Josephine stared down at the man who had haunted her for 6 months, now just a body in the dust. The emptiness she'd felt after the trial returned, stronger than before. This was justice in its way, but it brought her no more peace than the trial had. "I'm sorry," Drake said, rising to stand beside her. "I know you wanted to see him hang proper." She shook her head. "No, this is fitting, I suppose. He lived by violence. It's right that he died the same way." More men arrived, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. Carson took charge of removing Wilson's body, while Drake gently led Josephine away from the scene. "Marshal Turner?" she asked as they walked. "Alive, but badly hurt," Drake replied. "Doc's with him now." Wilson's men created a diversion that let them get to Turner, but we caught them before they could free Wilson completely. They had reached the main street again, where the celebration had come to an abrupt halt, the dancers and musicians now standing in uncertain groups, whispering among themselves. "It's over," Drake announced to the gathered crowd. "Wilson is dead. His men are in custody. You can all go home knowing you're safe." A murmur ran through the assembly, relief, mixed with the inevitable disappointment that the promised spectacle of a hanging would not take place. Mrs. Winters approached, her expression concerned. "Miss O'Malley, you look like you've seen a ghost. Come, let me get you some tea." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters, but what I really need is some time alone," Josephine replied. "It's been quite a day." The older woman nodded in understanding. "Of course, dear, your room's all ready for you." As the crowd began to disperse, Drake caught Josephine's hand. "We didn't finish our conversation," he said quietly, "or our dance." Despite everything, Josephine found herself smiling. "There'll be other dances," she promised. "But right now I need to think about the future, about everything." Drake nodded, though reluctance was clear in his eyes. "I understand. Just know that whatever you decide, you've got a place here in Aztec, with or without me," he added, his honesty touching her. "Thank you," she said, squeezing his hand before releasing it. "I'll see you tomorrow, Drake." That night, alone in her room at the boarding house, Josephine sat by the window staring out at the starlit sky. Patrick was avenged. Wilson was dead. The mission that had consumed her for half a year was complete. Now came the hard part, figuring out who she was beyond the vengeful sister, beyond the single-minded hunter. Who was Josephine O'Malley when she wasn't defined by her pursuit of Raymond Wilson? As dawn broke over Aztec, Josephine had her answer. She dressed with care in her freshly laundered riding clothes, packed her few belongings, and made her way to the livery stable, which was already being rebuilt after the fire. Midnight greeted her with a soft nickering, apparently recovered from her recent exertions. Josephine stroked the mare's velvet muzzle, whispering affectionate nonsense as she saddled her. "Going somewhere?" Drake's voice came from the stable entrance. Josephine turned, unsurprised to find him there. In a town this size, news traveled fast, and Mrs. Winters had undoubtedly mentioned her early departure. "I need to go back to Denver," she said, continuing with her preparations. "There are things I need to settle." Drake leaned against the doorframe, his expression carefully neutral. "I see. When were you planning to tell me?" "This morning," she replied honestly. "I wasn't going to leave without saying goodbye." "Goodbye," he repeated, the word heavy with unspoken feelings. "So you've made your decision then?" Josephine paused in adjusting Midnight's bridle. "Not exactly. I've decided I need to go back to Denver. To settle Patrick's affairs properly, to say goodbye to him and to the life I had there." Drake straightened, a flicker of hope crossing his features. "And after that," she smiled, crossing the space between them. "After that, I thought I might come back, if the offer still stands." "Which offer is that?" he asked, his voice low. "The one about building something together," she said softly. "About belonging here with you." Drake's face broke into a smile that transformed his usually serious features. "It stands," he assured her. "It'll always stand, Josephine." He reached for her, drawing her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. "But are you sure? Yesterday you said you'd only disappoint me, that you weren't ready." Josephine looked up at him, seeing the hope, the fear, and the affection in his eyes. "I'm sure," she said. "I will only disappoint you, Drake Fairfield. I'm stubborn and opinionated, and I've spent 6 months letting vengeance rule my life. I'm not perfect." "Neither am I," he pointed out. "Then we'll fail together," she said, echoing his words from the cemetery. "We'll build something, and sometimes we'll make mistakes, but we'll do it together." Drake's smile widened. "I like the sound of that," he murmured before lowering his head to kiss her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as she responded, her arms sliding up around his neck. In that moment, with the early morning sunlight streaming through the stable door and the scent of hay and horses surrounding them, Josephine felt a peace she hadn't known since before Patrick's death. When they finally parted, Drake rested his forehead against hers. How long will you be gone?" He asked. "A month," she replied. "Maybe 2. There's Patrick's grave to visit, his affairs to settle, my father's business to either sell or make arrangements for." 2 months, Drake repeated, his expression turning thoughtful. "That would put you back around Christmas." Josephine nodded. "A new beginning at the end of the year, it seems appropriate." "I'll be waiting," he promised, "and I'll write, every week." "I'll write back," she assured him, and Drake, "Yes, thank you, for stopping me from killing Wilson that first day. For showing me there's more to justice than vengeance. For," she gestured between them, "for this, for giving me a reason to look forward instead of backward." Drake kissed her again, briefly but with feeling. "You gave that to yourself, Josephine. I just helped you see it was possible." As she rode out of Aztec an hour later, Josephine didn't look back. She didn't need to. The town and Drake would be waiting when she returned. For the first time in 6 months, she was riding toward something, not away from or in pursuit of something. It was a subtle distinction, but it made all the difference in the world. 2 months later, true to her word, Josephine returned to Aztec on Christmas Eve. The town had changed in her absence. The livery stable was fully rebuilt, a new schoolhouse was under construction, and the main street boasted 2 new businesses. Drake was waiting for her, just as he'd promised in his weekly letters. They were married on New Year's Day, 1876, in a simple ceremony in the newly completed church, with Judge Parker returning to Aztec specially to perform the service. In the years that followed, Josephine used her business acumen and the proceeds from selling O'Malley shipping to establish the first bank in Aztec. Drake continued as sheriff until the arrival of their first child, a son they named Patrick, at which point he retired to focus on the ranch they had purchased together outside of town. They went on to have 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah after Drake's first wife, and another son they called James, after the child Drake had lost. Their home became known for its open doors and warm hospitality, a gathering place for friends and travelers alike. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Josephine would think back to that day in the saloon when she had first encountered Drake, when her finger had been on the trigger and vengeance had been a heartbeat away. How different her life would have been if he hadn't stopped her, if she had allowed hatred to define her rather than love. "What are you thinking about?" Drake would ask, finding her lost in thought. "About how fortunate I am," she would reply. "That you believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." And he would smile, that same smile that had first cracked the shell around her heart, and say, "We built something good, didn't we?" And Josephine would look around at their home, their children, the life they had created together out of grief and duty and unexpected second chances, and agree that yes, they had indeed built something good, something that would endure long after the pain that had brought them together was just a distant memory.